This is a first in what I hope to be a series of explainer videos where I am going to go over a few things that are happening as we speak. If you haven't heard, and if you haven't been following the latest news about the National Association of Realtor Settlement, then you're unfamiliar with some of these themes that I will be sharing. But if you have been following it, that you probably already know some of what I will tell you next. But this point of contention for most real estate professionals, practitioners, and those who want to get into the industry uh, have to deal with now are one, that the model of what we used to do, selling houses, is modifying itself as a result of a massive lawsuit, class action lawsuit, that was filed several years back and has now come to its conclusion. And the new age and revolutionary concept that will be applicable next will come into play August 17th of this year, 2024. And again, that's just an overview, a real simple overview of what's taking place in the industry. But for your information, if you are a seller, you can be prepared to hear conversations similar to those you've had previously, which is why, in the representative's mind, the agent who you are interviewing will come with the idea of you have to continue to do what you've always done, which is offer some form of compensation to those who bring a buyer who will eventually buy your property. Now, that being said, let's not be confused nor misled by this premise that nothing changed. Everything changed. According to this settlement, the offer of compensation must not only not be coming from the seller, because we can no longer put it on the multiple listing that way, because the seller does not have to be obligated to do that, because the buyer's agent has to also offer value to the client, which is the premise that we've always worked under, with the exception that the seller was typically the one footing the bill for the buyer's sake. Now, that aside, the buyer will have to enter into an agreement with the agent who they are entrusting with finding the right property, the suitable terms, the conditions that they can accept and live by, etc. So, as you can see, some of these dualities haven't changed the way any real estate agent will work. If anything, it has changed just who represents whom and how do those representatives get compensated. Keep in mind that our industry is based on a certain level of performance guarantees. The performance being, if I help you sell your house, you will commit to compensating me for having done so. However, the part of me helping you sell your house, oftentimes in the normal course of events, would require me to offer your property for sale everywhere. And if you look online for any properties that I have offered for sale, you will see that they pop up. They are popularized in a lot of different sites, Zillow being one of them, Redfin, Compass, Movato, Trulia, Realtor.com, Remax, and lastly, MaxMyHouse.com. All of these will generate the information directly from the multiple listing service, which is where this gets a little bit tricky, because now, based on this new settlement that will take effect August 17th, as I mentioned, the offer of buyer's agent's compensation is no longer applicable through the multiple listing service. As a result, someone that I just listened to earlier today was saying that the multiple listing service may lose its impact and it may lose its connectivity with all these other sites for that one reason. I doubt that that will happen that way, but it could. And what that would mean is that if, instead of your property populating everywhere, it may be restricted to a pay as you go type of a feature or service. And those are the things that we're still yet to see, because remember, this is all new. And when I say this is all new, I'm talking about a revolutionary protocol that has never been seen in the last 100 plus years of the real estate industry being the way it is. So that's one and several points, as you can see, of the many that I can expose or expand on. But I just want to give you bullet points of certain things. I mentioned the NAR settlement. I mentioned the August 17, 2024 date. I mentioned the fact that the buyers will have to offset their own expenses via buyer broker agreement. That buyer broker agreement will commit the buyer to the agent that they're working with in more ways than one. Not just a promise that I will work with you and you will work for me, but I will also agree to compensating you for your services, your time, your expertise. I have to pause here because in my almost 40 plus years experience, I have never had any buyer directly say to me something to that ilk, ever. So that doesn't mean that that doesn't happen. A few reference points are commercial brokers are accustomed to this because this is kind of the way that works. So one of those presenters was talking about it from that vantage point. Makes perfect sense. But again, for the traditional residential real estate agent, everything I just said makes no sense. And that's what you'll hear some of these agents that you'll meet or talk to present you or represent you say. And when they say it, they will say it convincingly for you to say that this is the norm. And again, this is not the norm moving forward. For yours truly, it was something totally different back 20 plus years ago when I embraced the concept of a negotiable commission and we had services that were substantially curtailed in cost, but overwhelmingly and generously and effectively offered to all the sellers with the idea that the more that we do, the better it is for you, and the better it becomes for the buyer, and the better it becomes for the operations at that time. So, with that said, the other items here that I have are one, when the buyer does agree to hire their own agent, the premise is that the seller will no longer be responsible for the buyer's agent's commission. However, as I mentioned before, most agents will still ask the seller for their share. What is their share if it was never something that the seller understood? So now that the seller is a little bit clearer about who pays whom, the seller will have the option of saying, I choose not to pay the buyer's agent's commission, period. With that said, the buyer is responsible for his agent's commission. And here's one of the discussions that I hear from time to time, which sits a little bit off because if the idea behind this lawsuit was anti steering and antitrust, then the idea is that we are not beholden to um, eliminate those properties where there is no offer to compensate the buyer's agent, but rather show everything with a blind eye and with the contract that says I, the buyer, agree to pay my agent a commission to find me the right house with the right terms, with the right price, and if I buy it, I agree to pay my agent. Now, the offshoot of that is that all agents still believe that they can ask the seller for that compensation, which you will see in a contract when the offer gets presented. So the offer may come across, I, the buyer, agree to pay you your price as long as you give me enough money to pay my agent his commission or her commission. And that's kind of the way I'm hearing the discussion go. But not to get sidetracked with all this detail, just so that you're aware of what we're talking about when a buyer does commit to pay his agent or her agent um, the amount that's typical. And again, these are not made up numbers, typical in the sense that this is the way things have been done. It was accustomed to have a quote unquote negotiable commission, but that commission was typically for the buyer's agent anywhere from 2.5% of the sales price to as much as 3% of the sales price, so that the buyer's agent was getting that directly from the seller as a result of the sale of the property in question. So, if that is the premise moving forward after August 17th, 2024, then here's what you as a buyer should be prepared to do. When you sign that buyer's agent agreement, the option will be, are you willing to pay me, the buyer's agent, the commission that I will typically earn when I sell this house? Now, if the premise is that I'm accustomed to receiving 2.5 or 3%, that's what that contract will say. I, the buyer, hereby agree to work exclusively with this agent, and if he or she finds me the right property, promise to pay as much as, let's say you're buying a $550,000 house, as much as 13,750 extra when you buy that house. That would be the buyer's agent's commission. Or $650,000. Let's assume that that's a price. And these are lower prices for our Bay Area housing market. So 650 would require you, the buyer, to set aside $16,250 for your buyer's agent. And now, if we're in the ranges of what we see here in San Francisco, the $1.2 million purchase price will require that you have $30,000 set aside from your pocket to your agent. Again, this is the underlying premise of this new settlement, the National Association of REALTORS settlement. The converse or the supplementary part of that would be that the seller may somehow make a concession for the buyer to continue to buy this particular property, the one that you might have found, provided that you give the seller the price they want. They may offset your cost by as much as they would like to, or as little as they can get away with. And what that means is that there is no commitment from the seller to pay the buyer's agent's commission. Period. I have to I have to make mention of that way, because even if you hear it differently from any other agent, that is the way it's supposed to work. And I would be more than happy to send you a link or two about how this is explained by the actual attorneys. As far as the sellers are concerned, things will continue to be similar. You will still sign a listing contract with your agent. That listing contract will spell out the conditions of the employment agreement. And in that employment agreement, it will outline what the agent may or may not offer as far as incentives to the cooperating community, realtors alike, and on and on. So right now, as it stands, you will see some agents still want to get you to commit to a higher commission. The standard, as I mentioned before, even though it's not a written standard, it was always negotiable, will be somewhere between 5 or 6%, if they can get away with that with their own version and explanations of those things. But as a rule, you don't have to pay more than the agent's share of that typical commission. And if the traditional way it was the commission is split between two offices, then if it was a 6%, it would be 3 and 3. So you could typically expect at least that from one agent to you, the seller. If they ask for more than that, then they are asking for the compensation to the buyer's agent. So keep that in mind. Now, with all that said, I will mention that this is still in limbo in a way. And the way that it is in limbo is that until it's tested, and it will be tested starting August 17th, 2024, when the new paradigm kicks in and the community at large starts working with all of this. And for more on that, I will make a couple of other explainer videos for you to see the new forms that are being used for a buyer representation, as well as those that are being used for the seller when they hire their own agent to sell their property. So on that note, I'll leave it for now. I hope this was useful and helpful. If it were, please comment. Please leave me a note. If you enjoy what you saw, you can subscribe and you can follow me. The Broker with the Heart, Jose Mario, signing off for now from Daly City, California. Until next time, find me online.